Hello YouTube, this is Matt Pullen. This is the second part of a two-part video. In the first part I discussed the moves leading up to this position. This is sort of a Nimzo-Indian-like line against the Veresov, which turns out to be bad. And here the threat is to play queen takes g7, invading the black king side and also winning a pawn. So there are basically three moves here that I talked about. I talked about g6, which defends the pawn on g7, but it also permanently weakens the dark squares. So I recommended that white play a3 in order to try to get rid of this bishop and make this bishop on c1 even stronger. There's also castles, which I compared to the pin variation of the Sicilian, without actually showing what that was. So let me just go through that real quick. The pin variation of the Sicilian, starts out, e4. All these moves are typical, and then bishop to b4, which is considered to be a little bit dubious try for black, because after e5, knight d5, queen g4, and here if black castles in order to defend the g7 pawn, then white has this move, bishop to h6. This threatens checkmate on g7, and the pawn is pinned to the king. And none of black's pieces can defend on g7, so black has to play g6. Now black castled knowing this. It's a calculated exchange sacrifice. Bishop takes f8, queen takes, and now the threat is on c3. So white plays the queen back to g3, defending on e5 and also on c3. And now black plays his queen out to attack both of these knights, and white retreats the knight to e2, guarding this. And now black advances his knight to c6, and white castles. This variation, the exchange sacrifice line in the pin Sicilian, it's obvious that black has some compensation for the exchange, but in practice it's not considered to be enough. With accurate play, white should refute black's attack and take advantage of his extra material, rook for a knight, or rook for a bishop rather. So compare that to this, where black castles in order to guard his g-pawn, and then white plays bishop to h6, and after g6 takes on f8, queen takes, knight e2. Now here, black cannot play queen to c5 because of the pawn on d4. The pawn is helpful because it guards the c5 square and white's pawn on e5. Also, this knight has not lost a lot of time, going to d4 and then back to e2. It's just come out to e2 right away. And there's really, without the open lines on the queen side, there's really no attack for black over here. Like if he plays knight to c6, then white just plays a3. The point being, you want to trade off this bishop on b4 and also prevent any bad guys from coming into the b4 square. So yeah, it's like the pin castles in this position is like the pin variation of the Sicilian, but it's worse because there's no queenside play for black. So let's go back to the most obvious move, knight takes c3. And knight takes c3, you may notice that this cannot be taken because of b takes c3, bishop takes, check. And this loses a whole rook for white. So has black won a piece? No, because white can play queen takes g7, the intermezzo or intermediate attack on the rook on h8. So black can move this knight anywhere he wants and it'll give a discovered check. But the point is that this knight cannot attack anything meaningful. Like it has 8 different squares that it can deliver discovered check on, and none of them do anything. So So black cannot immediately profit from giving the discovered check. His best move is to play rook f8, removing his rook from danger. In a recent tournament game, my opponent played knight to d5 check, and I responded c3, attacking the bishop, and also the rook on h8. So he gave up the bishop then by taking on c3, and then he played rook f8. But now white has bishop to h6. This threatens to take the rook now that it's protected by the bishop. Now the queen is protected by the bishop, and the only way for black to defend against this loss is to play queen to e7, but he still loses in exchange after takes, 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 and then king d2, and we've reached an easily won ending where white is up a whole exchange. So rook f8, definitely the best move. And here, there is definitely the threat that black will just retreat, for check and be up a piece. So what does white do? He can play a3. And a3, wherever this knight moves now, white will just respond by capturing the bishop. And just like last move, there are no meaningful pieces that the black knight can attack by moving away. So in order to prevent pawn takes bishop, black can play bishop to a5. So this maintains the pin on or rather, it maintains the possibility of a discovered attack on the white king. And here, in another recent game, I played bishop to d2 to break the pin, and rather set up a counter pin on the knight on c3. But it may be even better, actually, to play b4 in this position, because if this bishop just retreats to b6, then white has this move bishop to g5, and the only way to save the black queen is to play f6. Now white can play bishop takes f6, and again the only way to save the queen is to play rook takes. And now pawn takes, and white's next moves they'll both be pawn moves. So yeah, this bishop b6 retreat loses by force. After b4, black's best bet is probably to play knight c6, and the main line would go bishop to h6, which wins an exchange on f8. Queen e7, pawn takes, knight takes, bishop d3, and this is the best chance for black, but it's still an obviously winning position for white. He's going to take on f8 and go up the exchange. And after b4, if black plays knight e4, preventing the bishop from getting to g5, then white just plays the bishop to h6 and takes on f8. So b4 is a very strong move. I didn't find it, actually. I played bishop to d2, threatening to recover the piece this way. My opponent played queen h4. And the point of queen h4 is, it develops, puts pressure on this, and maybe threatens queen e4 check. So I captured the knight on c3. My opponent played d6, and then I played knight f3, attacking the queen. And after queen h5, I played bishop d3, and I had a tremendous space and time advantage, and I went on to win the game. Although, admittingly, in this position, it's even material. So yeah, to recap, if white plays the Veresov knight c3, then after e6, white should play pawn to e4. And now really the only sensible move is for black to challenge the center with d5, which transposes into the French defense. If black tries to play bishop to b4, then unlike the Nimzo-Indian, where bishop to b4 is a very solid move because because of the fight over the e4 square, bishop to b4 here, white just plays e5, and if the knight comes to d5, then white plays queen to g4 taking advantage of the unprotected state of the pawn on g7. And also, in this position, don't be afraid of the discovered check if the discovered check doesn't do anything. The main procedure here is to play pawn to a3, threatening the bishop, and then after bishop drops back to a5, white can break the pin like I did, or play the even stronger pawn to b4, threatening to invade with the bishop to g5 or h6. Well, I hope you learned something about about this opening, the Veresov, and how dangerous it can be to misapply ideas from other openings, into other openings. Well, thank you for watching, and have a nice day.